Today we have in our gospel reading the wedding feast of Cana, and the church has always ascribed, and I believe this is reflected directly from the catechism, that by Christ's presence at the wedding feast of Cana, it is Christ himself who blesses matrimony, holy matrimony. It is God himself who elevated natural matrimony to the sacramental sign of matrimony that we celebrate in the church. The sanctity of marriage has always been held true, not just in Christian time, but again, going back to our Jewish roots. Always from the beginning, from the earliest covenants, matrimony was held in the highest esteem as a godly bond between one man and one woman. And we see this also reflected in Scripture. We see in the beginning God creates, right? God creates the world. God creates all the living creature. God creates man. And then God says it is not good for man to be alone, so he creates Eve from his side. This is a very important distinction to make, because if Eve was taken from man's foot or head, it would carry a greater weight, right? It would have a different emphasis. If woman was taken from man's foot, it would mean that woman would be trod under by man. He would dominate her. That would be his job. But if woman was taken from man's head, it would mean that woman would be above the man, and she would dominate him. But the fact that Eve was taken from man's side, and specifically the rib, that points out the equality of the persons, of the human persons, different in role, equal in dignity. But also Eve was taken from his side, that rib, and that rib protects the heart. And so again, when man and woman come together in holy matrimony, we have this one flesh union. With the wedding feast of Cana, I'd like to kind of make a couple Jewish observations. In our culture today, you'll often hear people refer to the wedding feast of Cana as that poor married couple. They were so poor, they didn't have enough for the wine, and they were overrun. And Jewish scholars and historians point out that this was not a small affair by any sense. Rather, that the wedding feast that Jesus and the apostles were at was a huge celebration, most likely by an affluent family, pointing out that they had 6 stone jars. Now, in modern art, there's oftentimes this depiction of kind of this clay jar and someone carrying this jar over. Just really quick, 20 to 30 gallons of fluid, right? Water weighs 8 pounds a gallon, right? It's about 200 pounds. So no one's just going to pick that up and move it. In Cana, there are actually the stone jars. They have some of them, and they are approximately the height of this pillar here, the second set of pillars here on this ambo. It's about 3 feet to 3.5 feet tall. About this width. The walls of the stone jars are about 1 foot in thickness. These were hand-hewn for Jewish ceremonial washings. So literally, these were huge jars, and there were 6 of them. And these were used for ceremonial washings. And so you can imagine the crowd of people that were participating in this wedding feast. And the Jewish wedding feast went on for 7 days. And so all of this points towards the extravagance of the affair. And one of the questions that I was asking in my preparation, is why did Jesus convert all 6 stone jars into wine? Why not just one that wouldn't run out, like the jar of Jehoshaphat, or from the widow of Jehoshaphat, or like the multiplication of the loaves of the fish, right? You just keep on just reaching in and pulling more out. No, he transformed all 6 jars into that. One of the Jewish scholars points out that Jesus doing this representing the fulfillment of the 6 Old Testament covenants, bringing now into the revelation of the 7th and perfection of covenant in his blood. And so we see water turned to wine, and now wine will be turned into blood. And so we see this alliteration and this movement of what our faith is representing here. Father David last week said if you want a one-sentence description of his homily, it would be, baptism is necessary. I will continue Father David's spirit in that homily to say, in this homily, matrimony is necessary, but not just matrimony, holy matrimony. God's plan for marriage is what is necessary. When we look at the problems that we have in our world today, we can trace most of it back to the disintegration of the family unit. You know, they said the church has always taught that the nuclear family has been the core of society. And as the family goes, so does society goes. And I'm not going to blame all of this on the family. I'll actually expand this out a little bit. As the priest goes, so the family goes, so society goes. So I do not blame families for the fall in culture. I blame us for not being holy enough, for not sacrificing enough. The church in general, as a whole, has compromised way too much and accommodated and accompanied society into this death spiral of secularism and compromise. And so it's for us to make a stand and recognize God's plan for marriage and God's call for holiness and sanctity. One last biblical reference is that we know the sanctity of marriage is so vitally important because it starts with matrimony, with the union of Adam and Eve in the very beginning, and at the end in the book of Revelation ends with the wedding feast of the Lamb. And so this concept of self-gift in matrimony, the concept of sacrificing for each other, for total self-gift to one another, is at the root of what we talk about in holy matrimony. In today's terms, a lot of words have been added to the concept of matrimony or marriage. Today we have marriage, we have traditional marriage, we have non-traditional marriage, we have common law marriage, secular marriage, civil unions, same-sex marriage, right? Again, all of these take away from the true sense of this. I remember one celebrity saying that he did not support same-sex marriage, he supported traditional marriage. And the group that I was with, all of us kind of slapped our heads because this guy was on his third marriage. That is not traditional marriage, right? Traditional marriage is one man, one woman in a lifelong bond until death do you part. So secular marriage is this freedom to divorce and remarry at will. Just like in sexual relations, so too it applies to matrimony, is that there is only natural relations or unnatural relations. There is natural law that dictates the movement and the mode of the human person, the way that they join together. And in matrimony, there is a natural way of that happens and an unnatural way for that to take place. The natural mode of an unnatural marriage, just simply put in a single sentence, an unnatural matrimony would seek to live marital relations on your terms. Simply do it your way. I'm going to do it my way. I want to have it, this relationship, this way on these terms. And there is anything from the far extreme to same-sex relationships all the way to two Christians marrying and compromising in the way that they want to live their relationship with each other and with God. Father John Malloy would call those people but Catholics. I'm Catholic, but no one's going to tell me how to live chastity in marriage or sexuality in marriage. I'm Catholic, but we don't need to go to confession or go to church every Sunday. Father Malloy would go on to say that we're going to hell on our butts. When we look at what the church teaches about God's concept of marriage, God's term for marriage, is that you need to have one man and one woman who are free to marry, that they're available to marry, that there is a free exchange of consent, and there is an intent on a lifelong, faithful marriage that is open to children. And then, of course, canonical form, maintaining that, recognizing that that marriage has taken place under the auspices of God's intentions. Now, this applies to Catholics. For our Protestant brothers and sisters, the church recognizes or believes that a non-Catholic marriage is valid until proven otherwise. So our Protestant brothers, though they may not accept the sacramentality of marriage, the church recognizes that in the good faith that a sacrament, in fact, could have been confected until proven otherwise. A lot of times as a priest, someone will come up to us and ask, Father, can I go to this wedding? Can I go to this marriage? And I used to give this very deliberate question and answer about the sacramentality of it and things like that. And now I just simply ask, is this a godly marriage? Do you support this marriage? Will this couple, as they're living right now, if they were to die today, have they lived their dating and engagement period in such a way that if they died right now, they would go to heaven? That they're sanctifying each other, they're praying with one another, they've put God first in this relationship. If the answer to that is yes, then let's tease out this question a little more and determine whether you can go to that marriage. But if you say no to that answer, you shouldn't go to that wedding. It's a practical, common sense thing. If you do not believe that this is a godly marriage and that this relationship is going to help get that person to heaven, why would you go celebrate something with them that in the end will only lead to death and destruction, hurt and despair? Ultimately, most likely divorce. You know, the divorce rates in America are sitting at 50%, 50 to 55% for first marriages. Second marriages, divorce at a 60%. Third marriages, divorce at a 73% divorce rate. Couples, those are today's statistics. 10 years ago, before I was ordained, we had a presentation on some of these statistics, specifically of cohabitation. Couples who cohabitate, fornicate, and use contraception have an 85% divorce rate. Couples who pray together, practice natural family planning, and exercise their faith have a 7 to 10% divorce rate. So when we look at what we are trying to do as people of God, do we put our friendships before God, or do we put God before our friendships? Are we willing to have those conversations with our friends who may be cohabitating or engaging in a relationship that will not support their eternal salvation? Again, this is the ways that we can do this charitably. But going to a wedding that does not represent God's plan for marriage or will not ultimately end up in that way that can be naturalized, again, is a way of participating in another sin. You know, someone says that it's okay to go to your friends or siblings' same-sex wedding. And again, at the end of this, you are participating in the sin of another person by participation, by consent, by flattery, praise or flattery, right? At the end, when the announcement is made, everyone claps. And that individual who claims that they are only going to accompany and support is there in participation and support of that wedding. And so again, this is the way we can participate in the sin of another. We should let our yes be yes and no be no. I can't tell you the number of people I ask. I said, do you really think this is a good relationship? And they'll go, oh my gosh, Father, they're a mess. Like, then why would you go? For the party, for the fun, for the secular nature of it. But we have to choose to put God first. In our universal and culture and Catholic culture, the sanctity of marriage has been left. The world has encroached upon matrimony in all of our families and homes. And this is something for us to reflect upon. For those of you who are living your sacrament of matrimony or desiring to live the sacrament of matrimony, how are you doing it? Are you putting God first in your relationships? Are you putting your spouse second? Are you putting your children third? You know, I've done a good amount of work with Greg and Julie Alexander, who have a marriage recovery ministry. They work a lot in marriage recovery. And this is one of the main issues that we find in just a generic marriage that is struggling, is that hierarchy has been inverted, where the kids dominate everything. The couple's love is distorted because of all of their involvements with secular activity, and then God has become a distant third in their relationship. You know, we always talk about to have a good holy matrimony, we need to take two individuals that have a great, strong personal relationship with God in their faith. And then you join those two good Christians together into this one flesh union, where they seek to live that sacrificial love of Jesus Christ in self-sacrifice to one another, serving one another, loving one another. And then thirdly, the children come. Now again, I preached this and I had a man come up to me at the end and he says, Father, I get it, my children are third, but number 3 is right up in our faces. Right? You know, my friends Greg and Julie Alexander will tell you that if you do not tell your children that they are not the center of the universe, no one will. That your children need to see you and your spouse pray. Your children need to know that not just church on Sunday is a priority, but God every day is a priority. So to pray together as an individual couple is important. Again, a very simple practice, if you do not pray together as a couple currently, a very simple practice to get started is you and your wife every day without compromise. If you're traveling, you do it over the phone, whatever it takes to get it done. But a very simple way to do this will be to pray one Our Father, one Hail Mary, and one Glory Be every day together. You say the first part, your wife says the second part, right? It's a very simple way to start praying together. Then you can build on that. You can, before you say those prayers, you can say what you're thankful for and who in your life needs prayers or what issues in our family needs attention. And then say the Our Father, Hail Mary, Glory Be. And then you can grow and develop it from there. But that's an entry point, a very simple, practical way that every single married couple can pray together and put God first as a couple. Having that cultivating prayer life, love and respect for one another. To speak harshly to one another happens in marriage, but it's not okay. I remember at a conference with Dr. Scott Hahn, he said, I have said the most loving, wonderful, romantic things to my wife, Kimberly. And I've also said things to Kimberly that I would never have dared said to another human person. Matrimony brings out the very best of us and sometimes the worst of us. But this is why forgiveness in matrimony is so very, very important. God's plans for marriage includes God's plan of salvation, which is the forgiveness of each other's sins and failings and an opportunity for a new start. We look at, in our relationship, do we put communication, clear communication first, faithfulness first, chastity within our marital relations first, recognizing having this openness to life first. These are all priorities that we should carry in our marital relationships. Quite often, we can trace back problems in a marriage all the way back to the point of sterilization or the use of contraception. This is a regular issue we find in marriage recovery. And then, of course, the scourge of pornography. Pornography is one of the greatest destroyers of marriages in our world today. I did not witness this firsthand, but a friend told me the story. He was at this conference, and there was this question and answer. And one of the questions to the priest on the panel was, do you think pornography leads to the increase in infidelity? So does pornography create the opportunity for infidelity? The priest responded, no, it does not. Pornography does not increase the chances of infidelity. Pornography is infidelity. What is our Lord's definition of adultery? Taking a woman into your mind or heart, or for women, taking a man into your mind or heart lustfully and willfully choosing to entertain and engage in the impure thoughts and then potentially actions. Again, this is our Lord's definition of adultery. And so we have to recognize that we can cheat on our spouse without a physical person being present. It can be done in a virtual perspective. And so there's this call to purify our hearts, our minds, and our relationships, to put God first. If we struggle with these things, how do we overcome them? Again, you guys are getting a break today. I've already carried on too long as it is. I originally wanted to go through God's plan for marriage in this homily today. And as I was getting into this week, it's just too much for a homily. But it's not too much for you to do on your own. If you're in marriage, in your sacrament of matrimony, when was the last time you invested in your marriage? It's a good question. A retreat, a date, reading some of the church's teachings on matrimony. Again, it's not enough just to review from time to time. We should immerse ourselves. This is one of the beautiful things of the priesthood, is that often, sometimes every year, we have an ordination. And to be able to be in that ordination and to renew and remember and to be brought back to our fiat, our yes to God. So too with your own personal matrimony. Not only the reminder of it, but to study it, to look at what the church says. Have you read Ephesians chapter 5 recently? Right? This is men's favorite verse, right? Women, submit to your husbands, right? I love that line. And women do too. You want to know why? Because when it's properly explained, they love it. To submit to your spouse, sub means to be under. Mit, to missio, to be under the mission. What's the mission? The mission is to get to heaven. I don't know any married woman who doesn't want to get to heaven and doesn't want her husband to lead the family in that charge. So men, when you read the rest of Ephesians 5, women get 3 verses, we get 9, right? And it says, love your wife like Christ loves the church. To die to yourself for her. To sacrifice for her, for your family, your children. And I know many of you do this. But it's an opportunity to renew. So do we read the sacred scriptures on what marriage says? Do we read the sacred scriptures to hear what God says about marriage? Do we read the church documents? In our modern time, there's Gaudium et Spes, 4 or 5 paragraphs, paragraph 47 through 52, a very great synopsis of marriage. Familiaris Consortio, that John Paul II had written on faith in the family life. The Catechism of the Catholic Church, paragraph 1601 and following. There's a great book by Dr. Edward Shree entitled Men, Women, and the Mystery of Love. And then, of course, Greg and Julie Alexander's book, Marriage 911. All of these things are very accessible, and I'm not going to review these. If you want to see them, these will be up on the YouTube channel that you can come back and review this list. But these are great ways for us to invest in and know our marriage and our relationships, how matrimony should be lived out according to God's plan for marriage. We can always do better. Your marriage never peaks out. You never hit that pinnacle where you said, I have arrived, right? There's always more and greater opportunities. You know, in this marriage recovery work that I've been privileged to participate in, we have seen some tremendous conversions. And I used to call them miracles until I was with a friend of mine down in Texas. And my friend in Texas, he's kind of a country boy. He worked in a lot of land and cattle. And I was sharing some of these stories of marriage recovery with his wife, and she said, Father, that is just miraculous. That is unbelievable. God is so great. That's a miracle. And her husband sat back and he goes, nah, I don't think it's a miracle. And I said, I'm pretty sure it's a miracle. I mean, I'm watching this. He goes, Father, listen, I got this tractor out here. And if I go out to that tractor and I turn the key and it doesn't start, and I go over there and grab that gas can and I take that gas can and pour it into that tractor and turn the key and it starts right up, I'm not going to say it's a miracle. He's going to say it was out of gas. You go, Father, these marriages, they're out of God. They ain't got no God in them. They run low on God, and you can't just put God in one time. You got to refill it from time to time. Don't let it run dry. You're going to blow out the fuel pump. Have you topped off your tank with God in your marriage? This is an opportunity for each and every one of us to reflect upon today, those of you who are in holy matrimony or those of you who desire holy matrimony, to live your vocation heroically and well. In the scriptures today, those in need went to the Blessed Virgin Mary and shared with them their problems. So maybe it's your marriage. Maybe it's a marriage that you know, or maybe it's just the world situation. But let us go to Jesus Christ in the Blessed Sacrament through the Blessed Virgin Mary, asking for that great abundance of love and God's grace in holy matrimony.